If you're trying to figure out which smartphone to buy in the second half of 2020, you're probably familiar with Google's new Pixel lineup. The Pixel 4a, which came out roughly 2 months ago now, was an incredible budget-friendly device with that iconic Google Pixel camera and really good battery life, and of course Google's stock Android experience. But if you're looking for something a little bit more premium, there's now 2 additional devices that you should consider: the Pixel 4a 5G and also the Pixel 5. Now, while these 2 smartphones do have different names, they are really similar and probably a lot more similar than you might think. So what do you get when you have a Pixel 4a 5G that costs $500 and a Pixel 5 which costs $700? That's exactly what we're going to be talking about today and deciding which one of these 2 smartphones is the right fit for you. So let's start things off with the Pixel 4a 5G. Now, as the name does imply, this phone does have some similarities with the Pixel 4a that launched a couple months back, but most of those similarities come down to the design of the device. On the front of the phone, you get stereo speakers above and below the display with a hole punch cutout for the front-facing camera. And then on the back, you have a polycarbonate finish with a rear-mounted fingerprint sensor, accented power button on the side, 3.5mm headphone jack right up top. But that's really where the similarities between the Pixel 4a and the 4a 5G really end. On the inside of this device, these specifications have been upgraded, and it's honestly a really big upgrade from the $350 device all the way up to this $500 smartphone. The main thing is this chipset on the inside with a Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G, which is incredibly powerful. We've seen this on some really good mid-range devices so far this year with the OnePlus Nord and the LG Velvet. If you're into gaming, this can definitely do the trick, though it's not going to be as powerful of what you get with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset that we found on flagship devices this year, and even the Snapdragon 865 Plus that we've seen debut just this month. As far as other features go, you get 18-watt quick charging, which honestly really isn't that quick in this day and age, and then a 3,885 milliamp hour battery on the inside here, which should allow you to have this device running all day, and then maybe even a little bit more under regular or even high use. This phone also has 128 gigabytes of internal storage, but there is no micro SD card slot for expandable storage there. As far as RAM management goes, you only get 6 gigabytes of RAM here, which in my book is the very least amount that you should ever have on an Android smartphone if you want a smooth multitasking experience. This will manage to keep probably 6 to 8 apps in memory at a time, but if you're loading up games on a regular basis, you will have apps being dumped from memory as soon as you open up additional apps. As far as the cameras go on this phone, this is a big upgrade over the Pixel 4 last year in terms of the ultra-wide camera that's now included on the back of the phone. It's a 16 megapixel ultra-wide camera paired with the same 12 megapixel camera for the main sensor that we saw on the Pixel 4 last year. And the same goes for the front-facing camera. You have an 8 megapixel selfie camera there. For video capture, it can do 1080p at 30 FPS, which is a little bit disappointing in this day and age. But for the rear cameras, you get 4K at 60 FPS, and Google even allows you to switch on the fly between the standard and the ultra-wide while recording video. Now, switching over to the Pixel 5, this is where there might be a little bit of confusion because you might think that there is a generational gap between the Pixel 5 and the Pixel 4a 5G. But honestly, there really isn't much of a difference here. This phone uses a Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G chipset on the inside, just like the Pixel 4a 5G. This phone also has a 2-camera setup on the back with a 12 megapixel main sensor and 16 megapixel ultra-wide camera, just like what you get on the Pixel 4a 5G. Flipping this device around, you also get an 8 megapixel sensor peeking through the display here for the front-facing camera, the same exact one as what you get on the Pixel 4a 5G. Now, there is a little bit of a difference when it comes to the display sizes on these phones. The Pixel 5 has a 6-inch display versus a 6.2-inch display on the 4a 5G with the same Full HD Plus resolution on these devices. So with all of these similarities between these 2 smartphones, are they really that different? And why is the Pixel 4a 5G $200 less? Well, that has to do with a couple unique features that the Pixel 5 does have. This phone here, while it may look like it's a polycarbonate finish on the outside, it's really an aluminum frame with a poly resin finish on the outside. And the reason for that is that Google decided to put wireless charging inside of this phone. For wireless charging and also reverse wireless charging, they actually bored a hole through the metal frame right down here towards the Google logo so that they could put the wireless charging coil there and then covered it in a poly resin. You also have a difference in the speakers on this phone. You do have a speaker on the bottom and stereo speakers with this, but actually the front-facing speaker is below the display versus you can actually see the speaker right here, right up top. So that could lead to some differences there. And then there's no 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. But as far as the display goes, even though it is a smaller display, you have a 90 hertz refresh rate on the Pixel 5 versus a 60 hertz refresh rate on the Pixel 4a 5G. And then finally, the last thing comes down to the battery size. You get a 4080 milliamp hour battery with the smaller display versus the 3885 on that phone there. And also one last thing that I forgot to mention, 8 gigabytes of RAM versus only 6. So multitasking on the Pixel 5 should be significantly better than what you get on the cheaper device. Okay, so now that we have all the similarities and differences between these two devices all squared away, the real question is which one of these two smartphones should you actually buy and which one do I recommend? The $700 Google Pixel 5 or the $500 Google Pixel 4a 5G? If you want my thoughts, the Pixel 4a 5G is definitely the way to go. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The main reason to ever buy a Pixel comes down to the software experience and the cameras. And as far as these two devices go, they both have the same exact cameras and same exact software experience. The two cameras on the back of this phone should give you much better pictures than what you can get on a lot of other devices for the price point. At $500, this is going to be an incredible smartphone for capturing photos. As far as performance goes, they're both going to be able to do the exact same thing, except the Pixel 5 will have a slight edge when it comes to multitasking. And then there's wireless charging as well, which I know is really important to quite a few people, especially if you've been using smartphones with wireless charging for a long time. The last benefit, though, that the Pixel 5 does have is that 90 hertz refresh rate. But with so many other phones on the market these days with 90 hertz or even 120 hertz refresh rate, this one here really doesn't stand out. And at $700, there are some really good alternatives over the Pixel 5 that you should consider. And that's going to do it for this comparison between the Pixel 5 and the Pixel 4a 5G. Let me know in the comments which of these two devices you would rather spend your money on in the second half of 2020. And if neither of these two do it for you, let me know what competing device you'll be buying instead. I do have a full review of the Pixel 5 and 4a 5G coming up, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for our camera comparisons as well. You won't want to miss those. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next one.